welcome to BSides San Antonio. Before we begin, I want to give a quick shout out to our platinum sponsors, Island and St. Mary's, for helping make this event possible. We are also grateful for the support of Black Hills. I'm going to turn the mic over to Ryan, Rene, Rosado as they discuss what everyone keeps getting wrong about the cyber gap. Please join me in welcoming Ryan in her talk.
Hi, everybody. My name is Ryan. It's nice to meet you. I was here last year and I'm excited to be back. Few things. So my name's Ryan. I've been in cybersecurity for 15 years. I began the U.S. Air Force as a cyber threat intel airman, and I've primarily been in consulting since 2017. I've also had the honor of teaching a few courses at Harvard, and I also just started in my own grad program at NYU. Throughout my career, I think almost throughout the entirety of it so far, I've heard nothing but cyber gap, need cyber, which is shocking for as much as we've talked about it, that we still have such a cyber gap. So I realize that a lot of the conversation tends to be the same. And then the solution that people tend to think we need tends to be the same, which I didn't think it was working if we're still talking about the same thing about 15 years later. So I'm here to kind of present a different focus and a different approach. I don't have all the answers, but my goal is to hopefully get us to think differently about it so maybe we can actually fix it. First, some housekeeping. So, few disclaimers. What I'm about to share today is my perspective, my research, my thoughts, and my own, I guess, sanity that keeps me up at night. It is not reflective of my past, current, or future employers. But I really do appreciate all the support that they have given me. I'd like to state that much of what I will focus on today is from the perspective of women, but I do believe it could be also attributed to other minorities. It is not exclusive to women. That said, also, I want it to be abundantly clear that I don't hate men. I think men are great, and I'm not here to say that men are the problem. Just keep that in mind. And then the last thing I will say is I am doing some of my own consulting, so Adam Cyber Advisory is my own LLC. You see that. So as I said, as pretty much as long as I've been in cybersecurity, I've been hearing about the cyber gap, and how we need to train more and bring more people in, and train more and bring more people in. Closing the cyber talent gap requires more than adding newcomers. It demands a community with a sense of belonging, measurable progress, and more than just good intentions. Again, I hope this will just challenge the current conversations and approach that we have, because at the end of the day, we do need cyber. That part is true, and that hasn't changed, and if anything, we need it more than ever. So let's jump in. So if you were at my BSides San Antonio presentation last year, I asked the same question for a very different reason, but it still applies. How many people are in cybersecurity? How can you measure it? You know, what skills are in, which ones are not, which would you consider more tech, not cyber? Would you, go only by college degrees, right? Do you only go by rank and title, right? Like, how can we fix a problem if we can't even define the problem, let alone the solution? And of course, if you're in cyber, you probably know everything is KPIs and metrics. How do you measure it? What are you reporting on? Do you have a dashboard on it? So again, if we're talking about the cyber gap, what are we measuring? Obviously, we're measuring the need, but that's not how you would measure a solution or progress into fixing it. So how many people are in cybersecurity? Right? Like I said, who is in cyber? What roles are we including? IT and tech, are they in? Which ones are definitely out? Do you include sales? I love my salespeople, by the way, because technically, without them, almost nothing or none of, excuse me, almost everything we're doing would not be possible. If you're using a certain system, a certain SIM, a certain software of some sort, or even hardware, someone had to sell it to someone for you to then either procure it, deploy it, use it, etc. Right? Otherwise, you might be using it illegally, right? But when I ask if salespeople are considered in cybersecurity, I get, well, it depends. Are they a good salesperson? But no one says that about, IR and forensic analysts or SOC analysts or even CISOs. And not everyone's perfect and everyone, has their own curve. So why do we, hang them out to dry? So I think we should include sales. But if we include sales, how does that factor into the cyber talent shortage? Plus, I know a lot of really qualified practitioners that went into sales. They're great at it, right? So do they no longer count? Let's see. Is it only people with certs? I hope not, because I know a lot of people without certs. Do we only include those, like I said, with a degree? I hope not, because half the CISOs I know got into cyber before half the colleges even had a cyber program. And is it only people in the US? That should be an obvious one. I hope not. So how are we measuring who's in cyber? So again, I said this last year, and I think I used the same number because according to the ISC squared, they have an annual cybersecurity workforce study. And it's one of the only studies and only numbers I could find if you ask who is in cyber, how many people. Funny enough, in their more recent study, they actually are like, we're no longer counting. So this number is actually a little bit dated. But again, it's like the only number. And according to that, only about 20 to 25% are in the US. That usually surprises people. Most people I speak to think that most cybersecurity professionals are in the US. Of course, their report also states that we continue to have a shortage of people. So again, we know that there's a problem. But they actually don't publish what they're counting this on or what the 5.5 million is based on. So again, how are we measuring this? So are we measuring this? So I took over our, the numbers I could find from 2014. The green one shows how big cyber has been. So we've been growing, which is great. But the gap has almost followed directly with it, which is the blue line. So we don't have a definition of who's in. We just try to train people. But then, we have, I think, up to a demand right now, give or take, of 10.2 million people globally. So, that gap number or need is bigger than ever. In order to fix it, though, progress must be quantified, right? Consistent definitions of who's in cyber. Measurable goals. When we set, if we're going to train people or we're going to keep people in, because now we're getting to a point which we've been doing cyber long enough that people are retiring, right? So we have to have goals of, how many we want to keep and be, and then identify which skills specifically we need, and then track retention. The scariest part, I think, more than ever is half the CISOs I talk to can't wait to get out of the CISO seat because of all the politics and the focus and the targets on their back and the need to be able to present to the boards when we've always been so tech heavy. So that's just scratching the surface. Barrier number 2, of course, we have quite the paradox. Keep hearing about layoffs and people getting replaced with AI, and yet we keep hearing that we need more cyber than ever. So how does that work out? And crazy enough, right, with all the fluctuations, we keep actually bringing people in, and then we know as a junior it's almost impossible to get a job at entry level, and it's probably harder than ever between AI and just, our industry as a whole trying to figure out who can do what versus what can we use for AI versus what can we, side note, I hate the word offshore because I don't know about you, but I've never worked with a team in India or even El Salvador or anywhere else in the world that works from the beach. So I don't like to say offshore resource. But as you know, people do say that because they want cheaper. But they're just as smart and just as qualified. and they have just often the same, if not harder, training and requirements. But, with all the fluctuations, it's like, where's the cyber need? One company, notably last year, laid off about 500 positions. And in January of this year alone, hired 600. Now, from the digging I was able to do, I could tell you that some of the layoffs were not specific to cyber, even though it was a cyber company. Some of the layoffs were related to finance or HR, just really across the board for the company. But what shocks me the most, especially with how much goes into, you've trained these people, you've made an investment in these people, you've put time, and they know your company. You're telling me you couldn't train 20 to 25, 30% of them? You couldn't forecast your needs more than a quarter? We're just treating people like pawns and just in and out. That's what we're doing. That's the great thing come to cyber, and we just, use you, discard you, trade you, pick you. More importantly, for all the layoffs that are going on, the cybersecurity demand has not. We need security again more than ever. Hopefully everyone here knows about Mythos this and AI that, and the time for an attacker to get into your environment is down to seconds, I think. So we need to be quicker, better, faster, work harder, more than ever. Clearly not a good working model. And probably the craziest part is for all of the organizations that have been laying off because they're bringing in AI. I have to say, I gave this presentation earlier in the year, but I feel like I'm starting to finally see more research, so hopefully this isn't as newsworthy. But AI is making way more work, and it's accelerating complexity. It's not really simplifying it. Plus, we still have people who need to train to actually how to secure it, how to use it, how to, right now, one of the biggest things too is shadow AI. Now we're at the other problem where a lot of people want to use it in their jobs, and they're just using their own flavor of the week of AI because there's so many every week, right? But it's not sanctioned, or again, my thing on sales, right, hasn't been procured legally. So, it's hurting us when all these teams are, cutting people, bringing in AI SOC this, AI SOC that. Not that I'm anti-AI by any means, but it really should not be a replacement for people. It's increasing there's AI privacy regulations. They're calling it an AI tax. Employees now spend sometimes more hours per week correcting the errors even of AI if you are actually paying attention and not just hopefully you're not just blindly trusting it and you understand how hallucinations work, because that was the story in itself. So another short story of why AI, I think, will never fully replace people. There is an airline I travel often with, and I bring my dog. Now, if you want to bring your dog, you have to call the airline, and you have to tell them that you are adding a dog or a pet to your reservation. They don't let you just add this when you buy, the ticket on the app or online. And I have tried everything. It's like, tell me what you're calling about today. Pet travel, add dog to reservation, flying dog. I think I even tried cat at one point just to see if that would work. Whoever set this up did not actually set it up. And I've tried to tell everybody who will listen, I really need to write a letter to this specific airline, because while this is an impossible part, they are one of the friendlier airlines, I think, to fly with, my dog. But no matter what happens, I end up pretty much screaming, representative. And now I'm like, this is so annoying. And finally get the representative, and I'm like, it's not your fault, human, but I want to add my dog. But your AI thing does not know what to do with me when it's like, tell me what you're calling about so I can route you to the right place. Tell me what you're calling about. Tell me what you're calling about. I'm sorry, I don't know what you're talking about. This happens, and I fly with my dog enough, so trust me, this happens a lot. So I'm convinced, and that's not the AI's fault. That is the person or the team who's setting up everything from your customer and user experience to, and maybe they set it up in one, but it didn't, follow on to the next process or next part, right? Because it's not just one thing. So when I think of that, or we think of if you're an Apple user and you prefer the Genius Bar or the Best Buy Geek Squad, I am just thinking about, humans like talking to humans, right? We use calculators, and I think in the same way we'll use AI. But AI will not replace us. Now, it will replace parts of our lives and our skills, but it should not and will not replace us. So when it talks about the cyber gap and AI is not the answer to fixing the cyber gap. It is a piece of the work. So what is all that said and done after these different barriers and these different issues now related to the cyber gap of 2026 is, I think, belonging, because humans are needed. We are talking about people, right? What does it even mean to belong in cyber? What does it feel like? You know, I did a session at RSA this year and I asked, does everyone here even feel like they belong? And actually, I will admit, I was surprised because a few guys in the room were like, I don't feel like I belong. That tested my perception that as a woman, women just don't feel it. But there are men too. There are people it's not even just a junior problem, right? And maybe you feel like you belong and then something changes or the industry's changing or your job changes and then you don't feel like you belong. So overall though, if we're gonna be an industry and we're gonna be a community and we're gonna be a profession, well, how can you be any of that if you don't belong to it? So I believe the cyber gap needs to focus a little bit more on belonging. And maybe that sounds wishy-washy, but just stay with me. I can, tell you how this ties to burnout and turnover. And, when you have lack of loyalty, then what's the difference if, you're the good guy or the bad guy, right? I mean, what are you tied to? What are we doing? Why are we here today on a Saturday in a really hot day in Texas? Belonging is the fundamental human, emotional, and psychological need to feel secure, supported, accepted, and included as an integral part of a group, place, or community. It involves feeling seen, valued, and able to bring one's authentic self to environments like work, school, or social circles. Belonging is the feeling that we as individuals can bring our full selves, authentic selves to work, and feeling that our differences are recognized and maybe even appreciated versus, being seen as, well, we don't use that here, we don't need that here. So like I said earlier, some of this will start to also, I'm going to do it from the perspective, because I'm a woman and I do see a lot of this as being, women in cyber. I'm sure you've heard of many of the groups. And so what if the cyber talent gap is really a design and belonging problem? There's this really amazing book that, granted, it's not tied to cyber, but it talks about how the world is default male. And in a way, if you go back even a few hundred years, actually, you don't have to go back that far. Most stories, even when they're about a woman in history, it was told through the perspective or an author of a man, because women weren't taught to read and they weren't really allowed to write and they weren't even allowed to go to school, right? And while that sounds like really long time ago, a lot of those do have a indirect impact on just the world we have today. I know, sounds really crazy. Getting back to it. To fix the belonging issue, which I believe will fix the gap issue, we need to focus on the design of the people, process, technologies. And so we have to look into what's under the surface. Which brings me to, we invite women in, but our culture must make them feel like they belong. So, little history lesson. In the 1940s, there was a group of women called the ENIAC 6. Now, maybe you've heard of the ENIAC. I'll tell you what it stands for. I didn't memorize it, so please forgive me. The ENIAC 6, there were 6 pioneering women who programmed the electronic numerical integrator and computer, the first electronic general purpose computer during World War II. And when they did this, it was such a big success for the impact it was going to have on the United States' ability to go to war and win the war, right, and protect freedom in our country, that when they had the party to celebrate this beautiful new machine, the women weren't allowed in. The men in charge of the program were, but even though the women did the work. And I know it's not the 1940s, but I think that this story still shows in a lot of ways today. Now, not as much because we're making progress, but we need to make more. And what I think this story shows me and teaches me that I hope we can all maybe ponder on is I think people assume that women will feel like they belong in cyber when there's 50% of women. But we shouldn't wait for the numbers. Okay, women shouldn't have to feel or require the representation in order to feel like they belong. We can make changes today where women can feel like they belong. We can invite them, we can celebrate them, and we don't have to always make women feel like they have to play with the boys or look like the boys or hang out with the boys. Again, I love the guys. I've had great managers and mentors and bosses and friends and peers and even now guys on my team that I'm so proud of. Being a man is not the problem, but being a man is also not the solution. I mean, we're making strides, but these are things I think people, again, think that we need to wait for. And I just don't think that we need to wait to have 50% of women, because if you do that, then someone else is going to be the minority. And then belonging is always almost political, which is not what we're going for. Another thing that I thought was kind of interesting to kind of ponder on is Albert Einstein's wife. Now, granted, he wasn't really in cyber, but I think that this can apply to us. His wife that he met together at the Polytechnic Institute of Zurich. So she was just as brilliant, if not more so. I'm a little biased, but she wasn't allowed to publish because women weren't taken seriously at that time. And again, that might sound really wild. And you're like, well, Ryan, that was forever ago. That was a lifetime ago. Well, that still happens. Again, it's not specific to cyber, but there's actually plenty of research in corporate America that if a woman and a man publish, and a woman and a man are the same rank or the same role, it's just intuitive that we assume that the woman might have been the assistant. Or you go to a conference, and while I love women in cyber panels, a lot of people think that's the only place for a woman. That if you're having a panel on, I don't know, OT or zero trust or name your flavor of cyber, I meet a lot of people who tell me, well, I just don't think women are qualified. They're not up to that level yet. Are you kidding me? Some of the smartest people in cyber are women in different fields and different companies, and they absolutely could be on a panel with the guys or, whatever. They shouldn't only be on the women in cyber only panels. And there's a lot that goes into it. Some conferences, you have a company and they have to pay a sponsorship and then they elect one person. And sometimes the most, highest ranking person in cyber at a company is a man. But then that reinforces this women they're not at that level yet because we just don't see it. So to kind of switch, how do we fix that? How do we get beyond this? How do we even question our own subconscious and unconscious biases, right? Because we should not wait for the numbers to add up. That is not the approach we should be taking. Intent and impact are not the same. I think everyone hopefully has good intentions, but maybe you've heard that good intentions sometimes pave the way to hell. Now, hopefully we're not going there, but we need true impact. We need to look at the values and the intentions and the actual goals once we set them, especially for the cyber gap. We need to really figure out the systems, the cultures, and the behaviors. Are they lining up? I mean, we have burnout up the wazoo. We have, we still have women fighting for a chance to be recognized equally. And again, as much as I, love my women in cyber groups, I know more than ever, I truly believe, we're making progress and I'm so excited to be part of that. But we need men to help us, I think. I think it's why, we could do it and it might take a long time, but why wait? And I know plenty of men that are like, I don't want to get in the way. But if you're not actively helping, there's all this research too that, women finally have all these mentors, but they don't have champions. They don't always have a mentor who's also like, let me make an introduction and let me open the door. Sure, everyone and their mother and father want to give advice to a woman, which is great. I'm sure advice is nice. But when you look at what they do for the guys, they're like, hey, why don't I just bring you into a meeting with me? Or why don't I, bring you to a dinner? Or why don't I, see if I can just get you an extra seat at some dinner? And I know that there aren't women there because half the time I'm the only one. If you look at my LinkedIn, you'd see that on the dinner photos. But, so we're trying to help each other. You see an invite, don't just assume that man or woman that someone was invited. Say, hey, I want to make sure you got this, because showing up and just being a part of the conversation sometimes can just be that much more impactful. So something to consider. We don't need the cyber gap to also be this big strategic thing. It can happen in the little day-to-day you don't even realize. And sometimes you might not even realize the impact it has until after it's happened. So as I mentioned, the problem isn't just intent. It's also design. The default male problem. The world is default male. And especially more than ever with AI, a lot of data doesn't specify for gender. And so if you're making a decision based on data, you may not realize that you're favoring men. For example, if you took all the resumes of all the CISOs right now, let's say in corporate America in the Fortune 1000s, I think they say that only 17% are women, right? So if you're training based on just the resumes or the LinkedIn profiles, it may inherently create a bias for men or male CISOs because they clearly outnumber 50%. And so we have to be intentional about making sure that we correct that or that we look to see if that's a possibility. I mean, they've been doing studies for over 20-something years. If you have a resume, again, not specific to cyber, but it applies, and it has the same details, and it has a man's name, and then you have one with a woman's name, the male usually gets picked like every other time, if not more, over the woman, and they just did it again with the resumes and AI, and of course, AI picked them. The only difference was the names. So, this is my AI bias iceberg. You have the different, visible biases, you have human biases, then you have these invisible systemic biases that the number one step is to be aware of them. Let's see. So I will say for time, I'm going to try to catch up a little bit, so it might speed up. There is an amazing book called Invisible Women, and I highly recommend if you get a chance, man or woman, that you read it. It will change just the way you look at life, and you don't have to agree with all of it, but it is an interesting perspective. And this is the quote by the author that says, "The result of this deeply male-dominated culture is that the male experience, the male perspective, has come to be seen as universal, while the female experience, that of half of the global population, after all, is seen as, well, niche or extra or difficult." Even though companies with more women in leadership grow faster, hire more, perform better, even though representation actually may be declining at times or stagnating, right? It's not all linear progress. Sometimes it takes a step back. And don't get me started, we had the glass ceiling, now we have the glass cliff. So different topic for a different day, but this is what's going on, and it impacts cyber. So if we want to fix this, like I said, we have to think differently on how to build a community worth sustaining. We need to think about belonging, shared purpose, and connection. And also have a community that we're all proud of. So how do you define leadership, right? Because how do we do this? Now, again, also, you don't have to be a CISO or have a leadership title, right? Leadership is an act, I believe, more than a title. And so that's where you question or maybe ask yourself, where does it start? As leaders, we're not here to keep track of the status quo. If anything, sometimes leadership, or more often than not, matters more when it's needed, or you're under pressure, or you're in the war, and you're fighting with, and you're in a mission and you're in the fight, right? It's not when things are good. It's when there's something to be done. And sometimes, you're going against the grain and you're changing something, and you don't always have all the answers, but you're courageous, and, you believe in a certain mission or purpose. So, of course, with leadership, the first place to look is within yourself. More so, I had a story, but for the most part, I'll just tell you, I looked at the leaders I really respected and other people who were just leaders in cyber, and I was like, what really defines good leadership? And the one thing I came down to is if your followers are benefiting more than you, that typically is a good sign of leadership. If you're benefiting more than than your followers, then maybe, it's not saying you can't as a leader benefit. Obviously, you want your team to do good. And if you're in a company, then you're going to do good. But if you're benefiting at the expense of your team, maybe not best leadership, which more so brings me to, I think cyber has a problem with management and leadership. I think people think they're synonymous and they don't always understand the difference. We will teach all day how to, do malware analysis and, app security this and pen test that and SOC whatever. But I rarely, if ever, see, hey, here's a cyber management, or here's a class for how to be a good manager in cyber. And I think, again, people think, oh, well, I'm a leader, so I want to be a good leader. But what does that mean? And what is the difference? And you can be a good manager and a good leader, but there should be, just like anything else, there should be training in it. There should be, something to measure in it. There should be, a definition, and a good understanding of, there's some managers, I've had forensic experts, but they don't know the first thing on how to get you advice on a promotion. They're just following an HR checklist because that's what they were given. That is not good management. It's absolutely not good leadership, and we deserve better. We should want to be better. Now, this is probably one of the few areas I'd say the military, I think, does a lot better. But, cyber as a whole, I don't think that we've really grown in this way. Let's see. Another call to action. You don't need to wait for your leaders or your company or the industry as a whole to figure it out, right? You could start with you in finding the environment where you belong. Maybe you feel like you belong at BSides, or your local, there's a chapter of something, or your job, group and team. But if you don't, then don't maybe just accept it, figure out, well, where can I feel like I belong, or why do I feel like I don't belong? Looking for the environment that you feel like you can be yourself, you can be open. It does, it takes everybody. One of my favorite quotes is, if you're not, what is it? If the plant's not growing, you change, the environment, not the plant. If it needs more sunlight, you move the plant. If it needs less sunlight, well, you move the plant again. If it needs more water, you give it more water, right? You don't change the plant. If you don't know that quote, we can talk more after, but it's a great quote. There's also another really lovely book I'm going to get to at the end that a lot of this came from books, but one of the authors I use from a book called Tribe says that people in high-stress environments burn out less when they feel needed and connected. So, when you're trying to prevent burnout and you're just trying to have less work, which is great, but not always ideal. We work in cyber, and a lot of people in any job are going to have a lot of work, but how do you get through that? What does a supportive team look like? Well, how can you be a part of a team if you don't even feel like you belong to it, right? So, if you've ever felt like an outsider in cybersecurity, that doesn't mean you don't belong in the field. It just often means that you're in the wrong environment. And I'm not saying quit your job tomorrow, but maybe give it some thoughts. Okay. How to apply maybe some things that I've talked about today. If you lead a team, look for training on how to train them on AI and cybersecurity from a skill set. If you look at the gap and not just what you need now, but what you might need in 6 months or a year. I'm leading a team and I'm trying to figure out how to maybe make them, what can they both have now that will benefit the job and them as a career? And what do they want to learn? What's the work that energizes them, right? And if they're doing something that doesn't energize them, maybe, I can rejigger my team and be like, okay, cool, maybe this will be my vulnerability analyst, and maybe this will be my platform automation person. I'm about to recommend some books or audiobooks if you're into that. I should mention it, I don't think any of them are cyber specific, so we don't always need to be specific about cyber to enhance cyber. Like I said before, invite people. If you're getting invited, don't assume they were invited. Make sure, call a friend or make a new friend or a mentee. Doesn't hurt to even ask, hey, can I bring my mentee or something? Worst case scenario, someone says no or maybe. And lead like the gap depends on you, because it does. In the next 3 months, maybe, determine AI literacy so that, if cuts come, you're not cutting people because they are not skilled. Because in a way, if you're that leader, that's really on you, and that's not fair. Schedule one-on-one conversations with everyone on your cyber teams and figure out what belonging means to them and if they feel like they belong, and listen and understand. And if they don't, maybe help figure out where they can find that. And redesign roles so success does not require conformity. I'm not saying conformity, I think core values are really great, especially I can tell you about the military. And I really appreciate when a company has their core values and it's more than just fun marketing. But, when it talks about, hopefully parents can feel like they belong and that they don't have, that they can find flexibility, or friends, can feel like, hey, I don't have to hide the fact that I can be girly if I'm a woman, or maybe I can be whatever. Figuring out what that balance and what that looks like. And within 6 months, check in with your team and your peers and your mentees and See if there's anything you've been able to change. Has it met the mark? Do you need to shift a little bit, right? I mean, it's not about getting it right the first time. It's just about trying something different, trying something new, trying to grow. These are the books. This is an amazing book about leadership challenge. It's amazing that is the seventh edition. I swear by that one. I came across in one of my leadership management classes. Invisible Women, Data Bias in a World Designed for Men. It is just really great perspective, especially for the men in the room. I have had a lot of men, CISOs, actually come and tell me more so they've read it because they have daughters. But I just think you should read it because we're people in the world. Tribe on Homecoming and Belonging. It's actually a really short book, and it's really amazing. It talks about how, just in general, we've become a really individualized society and how that's kind of lost what belonging is. And I think that there's a lot of things in there that could apply to cyber. I didn't get to talk about this one as much, but The Gift of Not Belonging actually talks about a whole different personality type. If you know you're introvert and extrovert, there's a new one called Otrovert. I would actually tell you that I think I'm an Otrovert, which is kind of crazy because apparently Otroverts essentially they naturally don't belong, and they kind of go against, the norm, not intentionally. And so when I read it, I just had this thought of, but I feel like I belong in cyber, and I'm so lucky that I have that. And if I have that, I want to give that to those, right? So if I'm already genetically predisposed to not feeling like I belong, how lucky am I that I found a way? And if I can find a way, then I think everyone can find a way. The Moment of Lift, Melinda Gates. Talked about how empowering women changes the world in every facet of it, but it does have a really great chapter or two at the end about how women need to be in tech. It's the biggest sector. It's changing our lives like no other sector is. It's emerging, it's changing. And so if women aren't in it, how will we, create a world that's better for women in a community that, everyone can benefit from? And lastly, Becoming a Master Manager. Talks about the history of management styles between the 40s and the 80s and now, and values and global, your values maybe as an American are going to be different than if you have a team in Japan, and what healthy conflict looks like versus, obviously not healthy dysfunction, and how to grow through it and how to really be a master manager. And it's a book that I just think is phenomenal, and I wish I saw more of in cyber. And overall, I'm a book nerd if you couldn't tell, I would just argue that these really can help, performance, security, and innovation, and just overall maybe helping us move the needle on the overall cyber gap. So with that said, I think I'm out of time.
You still got like 7 minutes.
Oh, really? Well, okay, then questions? I was wondering where that was, but I thought I said 4:15 and I got it in my head, so my bad. Yes.
So one, thank you for your presentation. I was actually really looking forward to it. I think that we are drawn to similar parallels when we're talking about building capacity for the future. And I 100% agree that we're looking at the problem the wrong way. So I also just really appreciate what BSides does for this too, because I think that's the whole point, is that you're being able to continue the conversation and have those different viewpoints so that we can figure out what solutions we can actually have. So just wanted to say thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Questions, comments? Yes.
Yeah, so I'm from India. You before told about the offshore, people working from India. So what is the analysis? What were you trying to tell or trying to convey, explain? We can also understand what you guys require from us, a perspective of working, or maybe a strategy, or maybe the business point of view. Because I had one discussion before. One of the person he told they are willing for Indians to understand what is the business perspective apart from the technical stuff. So how is your input to that?
That's a big question. So the first part I think was what was I kind of talking about? And I talked about it, I think, really quickly. And it actually came from the leadership challenge. It talks about one of the best things you can do. You can maximize your ROI because it costs nothing and it can make all the change, is the words you use. So when I've worked with teams in India or anywhere else in the world, I don't say that, this is my offshore resource. There's actually a side note. I hate the word resource because if you Google American resource, you will get wood, steel, I think copper. You would never say, I need a CISO resource. And when people talk about American cyber personnel, they do not say resource typically. So it really bothers me that when we talk about global teammates, that they say resource. I think it's dehumanizing. And I think that people, again, this goes back to like systemic bias. When I've talked to people, like, oh, well, that's just what people use. And I'm like, well, I don't care. Like, change it. Like, I'm very intentional about, I've worked with rock stars. I've worked with A team, A players. I've worked with analysts. I've worked with, staff, teammates. So that's the first part. My teams that are global would tell you that they just feel like they belong. The second thing I found in my experience is, unfortunately, and it's a hard truth and I hate it, is I've worked at a few companies that have had teams in India as well as a few other places like Argentina, El Salvador, other places in Europe. And it feels like other members will give half very quickly, hey, this is what I need. And then you give them something from those teams. And then like, this is not what I asked for. And then like, oh, I'll find someone else or whatever. And they're not mentoring the global teams as much. They're not giving them enough feedback. And they are treating them like they're not part of the team. Now, that said, for the leaders and the people in the room, right? Question these, listen for these, think about them, maybe read the book. But and don't use the word resource. And like I said, I hate when people say offshore resources because, well, the offshore part, I'm like, no one's working at the beach. Okay, I mean, maybe every now and then you work from the beach, but nobody wants to work from the beach. So stop saying offshore resource because someone's on a shore somewhere, in an office probably. So that's my plug on that. The second part, though, is what can teams do? And, I think that they can try to, there's something to be said about different cultures, right? How we're raised in the States and how to be go-getters and, is different than how men and women, because it's different, are treated and trained in the culture in different parts of the world. And so it's hard for me to tell you what to do. I don't want to tell you to be more American because I think other people would do that. And I don't think that that's the right thing, right? About when we talk about conformity, you shouldn't have to be more like an American. You should be able to use your culture and figure out what you're comfortable with and maybe figure out if you feel safe enough to try something new. It's not, someone just telling me, I'm actually going to India in 2 weeks. I'm going to Bengaluru. And someone's like, they don't always speak up. Even if you're like, hey, I really want honest feedback. And we've had to think about maybe how to anonymize. We might do a feedback session, but we might have it anonymous through like Microsoft form surveys. Now, that's how we can do it. For you, I'd say, or the teams there. I mean, I really try to emphasize being prepared, learning about your client, learning about your customer, learning about your business, right? Don't just wait. I also I always say for me and say for my teams, like, hey, to me, success means when you can predict what your boss or your customer needs before they ask for it. And so, really trying to approach it, what does success look like? And maybe even asking that, like, don't just ask, hey, what do you need? What's the deadline? Say, hey, in general, like, bigger picture, or find a mentor. Actually, I think I'm running out of time. Yep. So my last piece of advice really quick would be to have more than one mentor. Maybe have a mentor from India that knows you or knows where you're from, but then have someone that's completely different, and ask them to champion you. I think I saw a hand in the back, and I think I had 30 seconds.
So I think it's, if I can offer, it's important to draw out, like, why do we care about if those voices are heard, because they're just, it's demonstrated, documented, just much better at solving complex problems. Everybody's thinking the same way, same exact thinking. And then if I can also offer, maybe sitting here, well, what do I do about this? Invite me, ask me what I think.
Yeah. And I'd also say LinkedIn's your best friend. I feel like that's my baseball card or whatever sport. I'm not even in really cards, but that's my card. And I could tell you a story later where I've just asked someone like, hey, will you mentor me? Actually, a few years ago, I asked someone, I was like, I don't know any Puerto Rican CISOs. Like, you're the only Puerto Rican, talk about representation. And I was like, will you mentor me? And at first, this person was like, is this a trick? And I was like, no. And long story short, I get the security apprehension, but we ended up having a Zoom lunch, and that was a really great mentor. And it was really exciting for me. And it's not a person that's local. Actually, now there's local people, and it's awesome. And I found let's say my Puerto Ricans. But I would. There's an advice that don't be afraid. If someone says no, then move on. Find the next person that will say yes. Don't give up. I'm Ryan Rosado. I'm on LinkedIn. And if you want, I'll be around here, but thank you. And I really appreciate the time today. Thanks, guys.